Hoy en la taberna de rol tenemos a Ree Soesbee. Ella es escritora, escribió para la Leyenda de los Cinco Anillos, por supuesto estudió literatura, pero inmediatamente se fue para el lado de los juegos de rol, también los juegos de video. Fue una de las escritoras que planeó toda la narrativa de Guild Wars y muchas cosas más. Vamos a estar hablando con ella un montón de cómo se escriben las historias para los juegos de rol y para los videojuegos y para los juegos de cartas. ¿Cómo se escribe ese flavor text chiquito de ahí abajo? Quédate y ya empieza la entrevista. Ree, thank you so much for being here. You're an author, a narrative designer, a world builder, storyteller, also a consultant. I might add a designer, a game designer too.
Mhm.
But you choose to call yourself your average everyday superheroine next door. How do you define yourself today?
It's hard to define anyone. I mean, anytime you try to define yourself, you find things you left out. But I would say most of what I do these days is I'm at home, I write novels, and I ghostwrite books. I work on video games, I do consulting for video games, and I help people with their world building. I mentor 3 or 4 people who are up and coming novelists, and I help them figure out how their worlds work and poke holes and make it richer. So I kind of, like, I have a backpack full of tools, and I use them to help whoever needs it.
Perfect.
So the common thread on one finds in all your careers seems to be fantasy. Could you tell us a little bit about how you first get into fantasy and the RPGs?
Yes. So my father was an old school sort of Baptist Southern gentleman, and my mother died when I was young. And one of my aunts saw me reading fantasy books and gave me for Christmas the red books of the D&D set. And my father saw them and said, oh, D&D is satanic. But he didn't throw them out. He just hid them. And so I would find them and I would play it, and he would find it and he would hide it. And it became like my defiance was I was going to play this game and I didn't care. And eventually I was in 7th grade or something, and I saw some boys playing in the library, and I recognized it was D&D. I'd been running it for like 2 or 3 friends, and I just walked straight up to them and I said, can I play? And they were like, do you know how to play? And I was like, yeah, I know that mechanic and this mechanic. And they were like, yeah, sit. So that was how I got into it. From there, I ran worlds in D&D and other games all through college for my friends. When I was working towards a PhD, which I didn't finish, I started writing fiction, various kinds of fiction. I wrote for L5R, which was one of the first big things that I was called in on. And then they asked me to start writing books for L5R, the Crane Clan book and the other clan books and so forth. And then they hired me on permanently just around the time of Day of Thunder and the opening of the second saga. And from there, I've worked on everything from World of Warcraft to Deadlands to Guild Wars 2 is one of my big ones that I loved. L5R, Legend of the Burning Sands, Magic the Gathering a little bit. I mean, there's a list of vampire, lots of vampire, tons of vampire. I am sometimes credited as like one of the hearts of the Sabbat, because a lot of the stuff in Sabbat was mine.
I have to ask, did the RPGs that you play influence your decision to study English literature?
Kind of the other way around. When I was younger, I used to love the Arthurian myths, Gawain and the Green Knight, and you know, the French myths where they came from, the Chevalier myths, and that was the myths of knights and you know, people who go out and do adventures and do wonderful things. And so a lot of the first things I ran were very Arthurian themed. And then I was already going to school for literature. I did my master's thesis on Gawain and the Green Knight and the original Christianization of the Celtic myth. And it was just natural.
Amazing. So when you were studying at this point, you began writing short stories.
Yes. to finance my college, I wrote stories for an erotic website for several years. I got paid, and I wrote stories. I would send them into literature magazines, both academic journals and like Dragon magazine, the L5R magazine, and so forth, and those would get picked up. So yeah, that was how I got started, really.
Amazing. So if we are not mistaken, you are writing a thesis in Japanese literature?
That was what I was going to the University of Chapel Hill and getting into the PhD program. My original thesis for that was going to be the kappa, which is the little turtle creature with a bowl in his head, and he's evil, and if he spills the water, he runs away, so you're tricking him into spilling the water. And I was going to focus on that myth and how that kind of trickster Rumpelstiltskin was in every sort of culture that showed up. But I didn't get it done because I got most of my coursework done, and then they offered me a job to move to Los Angeles and take over narrative for Legend of the Five Rings, and I did. And I came to their attention not only because of the stories, but also because I was winning a lot of tournaments.
That's great. So we have one of those pillars, right? That is fantasy in general, and your study of myths. We will get back to that. I want to do a little follow-up question. Were you always interested in Japanese culture, or when did that begin? Because
no, I always was, but I was interested in cultures different from my own. The very first few years of my life was in the Northeast of America, and then I moved to the South with my father and my sister. And the differences in those cultures got me interested in other cultures and what those differences were. And so I started just researching, and I didn't have a lot to do. I lived in the South with horses, and I just started reading everything I got my hands on. And I found the most interesting stories were the ones that I could sort of, I could understand, but also see their culture in it. Like the Rumpelstiltskin myth. I know that from a child, but when I look at other myths, I can see, oh, that's related. Oh, the Russians and their thrice 10th kingdom. If you go into the woods, you'll change your life, and you come back, you're different. That into the woods feeling happens in every culture. You know, it's Joseph Campbell, the hero or heroine leaves the fold, undergoes trials, and comes back with the magic elixir that will make everything better. And I just started looking into that. And the one I just sort of naturally gravitated to was the Japanese one. I felt that the culture, not just the way it was portrayed, because that was very fantastical for a long time, but when I started digging under that to the actual culture, you know, going from are there ninjas to no, they had nightingale floors. If you walk on them, they creak. That's one of the ways they protected the castles. Like, finding the reality behind what I'd been taught culturally was super interesting, and still is to me.
So now I want to go into the nitty-gritty of your hero's journey, quoting Campbell too. Let's begin with that part when you first step out of the known world. You started sending those stories to, if I'm not mistaken, correct me if I'm wrong, a small publication that AAG had back then. I think it was called
Imperial Herald. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, so, the Shizue stories.
I want to. Were you actually hoping to land a job by sending those stories, or was it simply sending fan work?
No, I was super exhausted from taking massive amounts of courses at a very intense college. I was staying up all night for classes, and my brain was rotting. And so I was doing something that I thought was fun. And I would write these little stories for my friends, because we would play the card game and we'd make stuff up like, oh, this guy is going to come attack you. He's so mad. Like, we'd tell little stories because we were geeks. And I started just writing stories, and my friends are like, you should send this in. They have a publication. And I was like, oh, okay, sure. So I sent them the first 3 Shizue stories, which is the storyteller who speaks to the emperor and tries to tell him truth. You know, because that was, again, that's a myth, the Scheherazade myth. You see that in a lot of cultures where the stories save her life. And so I started making my own myth out of that, and they picked it up and they said, you've been writing Crane fan fiction. Do you want to write the Crane RPG book? And I said, oh, yes, I do. Oh, yes, I do. I see Leon going, oh, yeah. That was how I felt too. I think I danced around my apartment that day. Yeah, and when I turned in the Crane book, the AEG contacted me and said, we'd like to have you work for us. And I said, do you want another book? And they said, no, we want you to move to Los Angeles. I'm in the other coast. I was like, huh. So I packed up 2 suitcases and I mailed my computer to myself, and I moved in with 4 guys I didn't know well who worked at AEG. And interestingly enough, one of them is now my partner. Has been with me for 28 years or something.
So-
I got his attention because we were playing in a D&D game, and I was about to go to a LARP. And I came downstairs and they were like, "Oh, we're going to play anyway, but it's a good thing you're not here. Our characters are all dead." And I said, "Why are your characters all dead?" They were in, like, they could see the exit of the dungeon, but there were archers on both sides shooting through narrow archer openings, and there was fire all over the place. There's like, "We'll die." And I was like, "Well, that's okay. My specialty is walls," because we're playing Rollmaster. And so I cast 2 water walls, one on either side of the thing. And I was like, that'll put out the fire and it'll make enough smoke that your arrows can't shoot you and you guys can just run out. See, I'm going to a LARP. And Kevin was like, "No, I'm going with you."
So it was actually a hero's journey. I wasn't mistaken.
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah.
What was it like working during that first period, at least in AHE, when you actually go there? You went to the other coast.
Yeah.
What was it like that?
Didn't anybody had to meet people, and other than the difficulty of moving, there was the fact that at that time I was a girl in a male-dominated industry, and that was hard. It wasn't that the people at AEG didn't trust me or, didn't want a woman working on it. They were super excited to have a different perspective. But at the same time, there was a lot of, is a girl going to lose interest? Is she going to get married and run off and suddenly be interested in, I don't know, purses or whatever wonderful things are over in that area? And I was like, no, I'm doing this. But I would have people come up at cons with my novels and say, "I want you to find Ree Soesbee so he'll sign my novel. Can you tell me which one he is?" And I would just point at Kevin and I'd walk off, and "You can come back tomorrow, I'll sign it then," but it gives them a minute because they make assumptions constantly. I mean, it's worked for and against me in various games where I play like LARP or big tournament games, because they just assume I'm going to have to ask my boyfriend or ask someone how to play or how the rules work. And I don't, because I wrote the rules. And but that's not your first call, or it didn't used to be. I'm really happy to see a lot of women and queer people getting into the industry. We need those voices, and I'm super happy that I got to be one of the early ones.
So I have to ask,
Yeah.
What would you say is the main difference when writing lore or world building for a world like Legend of the Far Race and writing an actual novel on that setting?
Yeah. Well, first I want to say, Leon, that I saw your lore video. I super liked it. It very much talked about how you need to make the world in your head, but you don't need to just shove the world on people. Let them discover the parts of the world they love and then expand as they fall in love with that. But in your mind, you need to have at least some justification of why the gods exist or so forth. Writing a novel is a lot more concrete than that, but also a lot narrower, because you build that world in your head, but you're like, oh, so the halfling has to get out of this problem. I'm going to have a magic item. Do I know if that magic item is easy to make, hard to make, costs this much? I don't care. It's a smoke bomb. He gets out. It's you're building the world in your head, and you can expand it a little bit without the concern that you're making a precedent that other people will not agree with or go in a different direction. You have more control. But in the same way, if I put everything in my D&D world into a novel, it would be Shakespeare. I mean, I've run the same world for like 18 years, and there's a lot of stuff that I know that the players don't need to know. And I change it from time to time as we start, new campaigns.
Before I continue, thank you so much. That was beautiful. Thank you. What comes first in your creative process? World building or the characters, the conflict? What is it like? The start of the process.
Well, like on Guild Wars 2, we had a world to build with that had come out in Guild Wars 1. And Jeff Grubb, who is a dear friend of mine, and I sat down in a room and just started throwing things out there. What could an adventure be? But we realized that in Guild Wars 1, the world is a little less developed. It's much more of a PvP game. People aren't going as much into the detailed history as they ended up doing in Guild Wars 2, and some of that history we wanted to change. So we had sort of a tablet to build out from. For me, it was about what makes this world unique and distinct, so that the adventure and the character will be unique and distinct. And then I go from there, because if I'm looking at a fantasy world and I'm telling you the same story you've heard in every other fantasy world with the same character archetypes in every other fantasy world, I'm doing that world a disservice. If you play a D&D game in my world and you don't wonder, hey, wait, where'd the gods come from? They just showed up one day, sort of thing. Then I'm just running some other game. Like, that is finding the heart of the world, and the metaphor or the theme that makes this world cool and unique and awesome should be the core of where everything comes from after that, in my opinion.
Yes.
Okay. So afterwards, you then branched out to other worlds like Seven Sea, Star
Yep.
Trek, and
Oh, yeah.
Deadlands. How did that happen?
Well, most of those were people that I already played the game on or already loved. Like, Deadlands was one of the few that I didn't know well, but I knew a deck. Like, I played a Maze Rats deck, and so I knew the deck, and then I went and looked into the world when they were like, will you write this? Vampire was very much the same way. When I first started playing Vampire, like, the Sabbat book was all NPCs. There wasn't any playable, and the LARP had the Gray book, which had, like, some of the disciplines have 3 dots and some of them have 5 dots, and it's all crazy. And I was already playing that when my friends that I had met through writing who worked on Vampire, Rich Dansky, Justin McKillick, so forth, were like, would you write something for us? And I was like, oh, yes, I absolutely will. And in fact, can it be that? You know, so I wrote the gargoyles for the Lasombra, or the gargoyles for the Tremere book, which was credited in the Lasombra book because things were weird back then, and White Wolf was like a pirate's clubhouse. And from then, I would talk to them at cons, and we would sit around and talk about how the world developed and why the Sabbat made any sense at all. And we're just running around and you know, being idiots all over the place and how that worked. And they were like, you have good ideas, come write this. But it was because I already loved the game. It was because I already knew the game. It was because when they looked at me and said, hey, will you write for us? They knew I didn't have to get up to speed. I had that passion for it. For almost all the projects I've worked on long term, from, you know, Guild Wars and everything else, it's been something I love to do.
I have a small follow-up question, a really small follow-up question. I'm a journalist, so I always preface these questions with that pop out. So if you want to deflect, I'm giving you time to think about it. You said that you had passion for almost all of the projects that you work on. Did you work in something that you felt was hard, or you were struggling to find passion in it?
I have turned down some stuff that I didn't feel passionate about. One of the things I wrote, I think like only 2 or 3 years ago, is I did some stuff for Evil Genius, and they threw a lot of different things because they had like 10 different things they were writing in, and I picked Highlander and Pacific Rim because
Right.
those were 2 I liked, and I liked both of them in kind of a tongue-in-cheek. This is the glorious thing. Don't push too hard. You'll find out where all the holes are.
Everyday
Okay.
heroes, right? We are talking.
Yeah. But they gave, like, they had 10 options of licenses, and I got to pick because some of them I just wouldn't have been all that interested in. And it's not like, I mean, I played Shadowrun and then Cyberpunk. I've written short stories in that world, but I wouldn't feel as comfortable making up tech as I am making up vampire powers. For me, I also think about the mechanics because it's the thing I do. And when I think about how am I going to portray the Bruja, I want to give them a merit that makes them want to fight together because I want to see the clan do that. So I'm replicating in the mechanics of the clan how I want to see that clan naturally play. Because you always come on things in games where you're like, well, they're supposed to be a token deck, but the best cards have nothing to do with tokens. And you're like, ah. So again, the heart of what makes that cool, you want to focus on it. So there have been projects where I've been a little less passionate. There have been projects where I've been a little more reined in. I mean, I love Star Trek. It was one of the things my dad and I bonded over is who could name the old, like the 1960s Star Trek episode in the first few seconds. Like, is it the one with Spock and the creature that's sentient? And, you know, but my dad and I would sit there and try to outgun each other on who could tell what episode it was going to be. So when they were like, come write, I was like, yeah. And I didn't write a lot, but I wrote in Way of Kolinar. I got to write some of the Vulcan stuff. And I wouldn't have picked the Vulcans out of a hat as my favorite, but it was enough to be contributing to Star Trek, you know, to have that connection with the world.
That's amazing. So you then tackled the Dragonlance setting too.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
with Dragonlance, the New Adventures, and the Elidor trilogy.
Yeah.
You expanded many universes, like Star Trek. But what was it like expanding on that setting?
Oh, my editor there was super good, and I'm still friends with her. She's wonderful, and she would let me pitch all kinds of things, and then like calm me down, like, no, we can't have that. But she would let me have things too. Like I had Dalamar, who is Raceland's apprentice, like, show up in one of my books for a chapter and do stuff with my main characters, because I wanted them to have that. I wanted people who read it to recognize the world in it. And so that was always exciting when I was like, can I use this? Yes, yay, I'm gonna run off and nominate it. But it was also, as I don't know if this is not humble, but it's a responsibility, because there are hundreds of thousands of people who will point at your Kender and say, that's not what I think a Kender is. And you have to just accept that. Like every D&D running, every DM running a world is going to have a different interpretation. And you have to be within the boundaries of what people recognize, but you also want to make it a unique character. Like one of my favorite characters that I wrote in that is a Kender who wants to feel fear and goes through the entire book like throwing themselves in places where fear might happen in the hopes that they'll feel it. And that's a different take on Kender than we had seen before. But it very much falls into what a Kender is. And so having that balance between the two was one of the most difficult things, and is one of the most difficult things about working in kind of a pre-established IP.
So I want to go a little bit to a topic that we touched upon very briefly, but I think it's quite central in your career. One of the main topics that I see that you've always tackled in your work is the idea of myths, right? From the Celtic myths to the Arthurian myths, and of course the Japanese myth, and the way that the myth is structured. Do you think there is a relation in the way that we role players tell stories and the way that cultures create myths? Could you tell us a little bit about
that? Is such a good question, because we as humans we've lost a certain amount of the knack of telling each other stories. There are people we designate as storytellers. They're writing our movies, they're writing our TV, they're writing whatever we're reading. And we don't just go to each other as often and not just say, hey, I read this, but say, hey, here's a story we can make together. And that was how people communicated. I mean, they deliberately wrote the Odyssey and the Iliad in rhyme so that it could be passed down and each person could tell the same tale, but it still could connect them because other people knew that story as well. As people, I think the ability to learn from not only our own mistakes, but pass the knowledge on to our children, to other people, to make society better, to make ourselves better, to learn and listen where somebody else touched something hot and burned their hand. And now I've heard his story. I've seen the pain on his face when he describes it. And I know how to do that. Like the telling of stories, the building of myths is as innate to us as pattern recognition. It's what humans do. You don't just come home and say, I hurt myself. You come home and go, oh, I went and I touched this thing. It was super hot. And this guy made a face at me. You tell the tale and people remember it and they learn. And so I don't feel we do that enough just as humans these days, speaking very generally. And I hope that some of the works I've done have helped to sort of spur other people. Like if you loved my Dragonlance books, I hope you're playing Dragonlance. I hope you're picking up Dragonlance. If you like the stuff that I did for Guild Wars 2, I hope you're still playing it. Because I want those myths to mean something to people, and I want them to make people better, to make society better, to make them learn things without experiencing the pain. If that makes sense. Going off, like Leon and I are like, oh yeah, but I'm not sure if I'm kind of in hippie land.
No, it makes perfect sense.
Yes, for me, it's your work in Legend of the Five Rings, for example.
Yeah, very much. And Legend of the Five Rings was a little harder because at the time we weren't as cautious about other people's cultures. And we took a lot of, here's some Chinese and here's some Japanese and look at the otaku, they're talking something else. And I think if I had a chance to do it again, I would be a lot more respectful, and I might like model each clan after a more specific culture and really display how beautiful and strong and those cultures can be in their own senses of honor. but we didn't do it that way. But I still look back and I think for a lot of people, that's the first time they had any experience with Eastern culture at all. And if they got an interest and a respectful interest in it, then I did the first job. I made them take that step, and they'll go learn for themselves.
If I may, and this might be not related to the interview, but what I found that I like and my friends like about the fire is that it was absolutely respectful, at least in the standards of the time. And we all got what was myth and what was truth, and we all, it was like a small window that we could see the world of regular, and that was amazing for us, and it still binds our friendship with all of them, so it's still amazing.
Thank you, that's wonderful.
So
I have a lot of good stories about L5R and cons, and one of the things we gave away for the winner was the armor of Lord Moon, which was a full set of samurai armor, but the only person who could fit in it was me, so because I was small, so I had to put it on and walk around and be Lord Moon for like half the afternoon so everybody could see the cool armor. It was really cool.
So going back to the question, sorry. What would you say is the hardest part of writing fantasy? Is it building the habit of writing, the editing, the reception by the fans? What is it?
Yeah, it's finding the line between my world and the reader's world. Because the minute I publish it, the minute I let it go, it's not mine. They're going to take that world and build their own stories in it. And those stories might not be stories I would have told, but they have just as much right to be told as my own. I mean, the world, when it leaves a writer's heart and it's in the pages, becomes everybody's. It becomes part of your myth and not just the story I told. You know, if the Odyssey tells you how to travel, that myth has taught you something. And the same thing with L5R and the other worlds. Like, if this has led you down the path of any interest to educate you or tell you something that's good, but you have, in order for that to happen, you have to take it. I can't hold it out and say, here it is, and then you walk away. I have to make a world that is interesting enough and metaphoric enough for you to fall in love with it in your own way and want to tell stories there too. And finding that balance between the two is hard, because it's hard not to say, oh, Elidor's my character, he wouldn't blah in some other novel. But once you let go, he needs to move on. He needs to do other things without me, or else it's just a TV show. You know, part of the joy of tabletop and LARP and role-playing games is doing it, getting out there and playing it. And you had no idea your player was going to do this really incredible thing, and now you have to stop for a minute. Or you get that moment as an evil DM where you go, ha ha ha, this thing 6 months ago, you didn't know, and it hit you in the face. And those moments are so cool, and those are the moments that make us feel like heroes. But you have to let go a little and let them love it as much as you do.
One of the things that most fantasy authors find hard is querying their work, sending to the agents and editors. This has happened to you? Did you ever need to query your work? Or
to quit?
Query, send it to agents and editorials.
Oh yeah, I've had to do some of that, but I've been fortunate in that most of those times I've had someone sort of to speak for me. I wrote a novel for Peter Atkinson, and I'm not sure if he's published it, but I wrote it a few years ago for his world, Chaldea, and I got to do that not because I knew him, but because I knew someone else who knew that I could write that way. And so having those kind of connections, not like an old boys network, but that my work is out there and people see it and they go, oh, you can write this stuff. So if I know somebody who needs that kind of writing, you know, I'll come to you. I need somebody to do a noir book, and I know that you did vampire. Well, that seems like a fit. And if you don't have your work out there, if you don't just write, put it on a website, get it into online journals, do anything you can to draw it some attention, that's how you get more jobs and more writing. That's how you get more invested in doing it.
Amazing. So there was a point when your work, you transitioned from tabletop and novels into the video game world.
Oh yeah.
How did that happen?
We had just finished making Warlord Saga of the Storm. And that was my world building and my partner Kevin's mechanics. It was his entire thing about moving the cards back and forth in Warlord Saga of the Storm. And that game, like I had just left AEG, they were cutting down, they were going to do board games now and other stuff. And then I got a phone call from one of the founders of AEG. And they were like, we want to have you come up to Seattle and talk to us and see if you're a fit for this job. So I did. And one of the things they did with me is they put a whole bunch of concept art on a table, just like a stack, and just threw it on the table. And they said, make a story. And I was like, all right, this guy's the hero and he's going through this dungeon and this thing. And I told a tale with whatever was in front of me, because they wanted to know if I had the adaptability that if a designer says, sorry, we can't do that, or if an artist says, I have a better idea for what the Citadel looks like, that I could just roll with it. Because they didn't want Guild Wars 2 especially to be just one person's vision. They wanted everyone to chip in and feel passion. And they wanted the writers to be able to flex and make that cool. We completely redid the Sylvari. Myself and another designer named Kristen, we went through and they had come up with a tree people design, and they had sort of a background, and we didn't like it, either of us. And we stayed late for like a month or 5 weeks, and she art designed it, and I like re-narratively designed it, and we pitched it to the head of the company, and they used that instead. You can find videos about it on YouTube. I remember we did some at the time, but we wanted the Sylvari. We were passionate enough that we wanted to make it cool. We didn't want to settle for half. And the more people that have good ideas, the better it's going to be. I mean, you have to have a person guiding it. You can't just throw all the things in there and call it soup. But being able to go to someone else and go, wow, I'm really stuck. This has got to be a big dark citadel. But when I think of it, it's just a big dark citadel. Leon, do you have any ideas that are weird about big dark citadels that we can work with to make this better? Being able to do that within your team just makes things better.
So a little follow-up. I'm not a writer myself, but I would say that I heard a lot of the differences between GMing a tabletop RPG and writing a novel. It's typically something that's pointed out, like you're not preparing a game, you're writing a novel. There's a difference. And when you said that the way they pitched you that with the images and the concepts for you to develop a story, would you say that there was any connection between your background in TTRPGs and
video games?
Yes, I made a connection between the improv capabilities that you need to have, the flexibility you need to have as a GM to play, and that improvisational work that not many novelists have.
Yeah, and that is one of the hardest things about, in my opinion, about writing a video game story, is you want it to be flexible. You want to say, do you fight him? Do you sneak past him? Do you trick him? And you want the player to feel like, I'm playing a sneaky character, I'm going to pick this direction. But every time you do that, it branches, and you have to write both. And so it branches again, you have to write both. Branches again, they have to design both. And so having stories that can kind of get you to the same place, but differently, and make you feel rewarded for going a slightly different way, so that you feel like you chose a path instead of being forced on a path, it's hard. It's really hard, because you go back and forth between, this is just a cosmetic choice and it doesn't really mean much, to I'm going to have to stay for 6 weeks and write this whole story branch because now it's gone somewhere else.
So going back to the design team of a narrative team in a video game, how big are the narrative design teams in those kind of projects, or at least in Guild Wars? How many people were working in those positions?
Jeff and I were the narrative design, the world builders, and by the end of the project, we probably had 15 or 20 writers and 200 designers and engineers. I think the entire company was 300 and something at one point. And we would have people who were working kind of exclusively on different story branches, like the Sylvaris branch or one of the Orders branch, because that way they knew every part of that story and they didn't know what was going on with the char. We're going too fast. Somebody else is doing the char. But for the people at sort of overview, Jeff and I had to keep in mind, this story is starting to sound a whole lot like that story. We need to make them different or make this choice mean more.
So going to that part about the choices, and that there are two things that I always wanted to ask someone that work in narrative design in video games, especially in MMORPGs, which is, first of all, you of course try to build a narrative that evolves, right? As time goes on, you have new events, new things happening in the world, but you also need to balance it without, I mean, you can't break the world every single time because it gets repetitive. If every week is an apocalypse.
Time to save the world again. Why doesn't it just stay saved? Yeah. You have to come up with entirely different ways. Like we had the dragons attack, and one thing we tried to set ourselves up with, and in a lot of novels, if you're writing the first of what you think will be a series, you try to start foreshadowing what you want to do next, not just as simply as we've beat the king but now we have to go beat the other guy, but we've discovered magic works this way, and then the next book is, so what does that mean for this? What if magic works this way, then what does that mean for cities that are protected by magic? How did that work? How did that get started? Like building that core of the world and having it in your head, even if it's not all over the novel, is important to the longevity of the story. The more you kind of understand about your world and can build off it, the more stories are possible, the more stories are interesting.
So I'm focusing a little bit more on that. If I'm not mistaken, Guild Wars 2 is set 200 or 300 years after
it's like 250.
Yes, after Guild Wars 1. Is that kind of time jump between the two versions of the game? Of course, they are two different games. A nice way to clean up the... Yeah,
it was a way, but it wasn't that easy. One of the things that we did is we came out with some novels that went between. Jeff Grubb wrote one, I think it was I don't remember the name of it, but it was all about the story of the humans and how they evolved and how they had gone over that 200 years. I wrote the one with Kobaya Mariner, Sea of Sorrows, which had the rise of Lion's Arch, and it started with him at like 18 and ended with him at 80 or 70 something, like in pieces of his life to show the world moving. And so those novels were very important to get people who were invested in the first game to understand what that meant to the second game and why that story was still there, even if it wasn't front and center.
And the last follow-up question, because I had a lot of questions about this topic. So another thing that one finds in MMORPGs is the fact that there's this kind of fiction inside the fiction that every player is in some way the protagonist of the whole tale. They are witnesses to everything important that happens.
Yeah.
How do you tackle that as a narrative designer? Because I think it's, or perhaps it's easy and I'm just complicating it.
No, there's a balance there too, because there's a balance between you are the protagonist, you are making all the choices, and you have to kind of make the choices I need you to make, or the story isn't going to get where it ends. It's going to go off into somewhere else. And being able to kind of give the player that leeway to make those choices, but making those choices relevant. That is exactly what you just said. That's the hard part. It's easier it's easier in a tabletop or a LARP where somebody does something surprising and you go, okay, give me 5 minutes. I'm gonna make this cool. You can't do that you had to think ahead. You had to just guess that somebody was gonna think this is cool and do this thing, and common psychology makes them want to be sneaky at this point. So let's make that work. Hard. And if you don't do it, like I've played many games, I can think of one game that right off the bat I just turned it off after like one of the opening cinematics, because my character was shown in the cinematic just making choices that I would never make. And I was like, I now, the game might be brilliant, but I am now no longer interested in the story, and that's sad. And it isn't just as simple as I open this door instead of that door. It's like my character goes off and has sex with this person. What? No, I didn't like that person. I thought they were an awful NPC, and I wouldn't have played with them after the tutorial anyway. Why did I go off and do that? No, I'm not interested. Whatever. And you can shock your audience a little bit, but you can't make them disassociate and not feel like it's them.
Right.
So across all your work, TTRPGs, novels, MMOs, is there a project that still stick with you as essentially meaningful, especially meaningful?
A lot. If I had to, for my personal choice, if I had to pick one thing that I'm super proud of, it is chapter 2 of the by night version of the rules for Met, because the chapter 2, I took 30 books written over like 15 years by various White Wolf authors, and I made a timeline of here's what happened, and this happened before that, and this happened after that, because they kept it very deliberately vague so that you could make your own stories in the world, but for the purposes of a shared world where it's not like Leon's over here making one game and Federico's over here making that game, where we're all playing in the same game. We have to have the same understanding of the world. So if I come to it and go, the Red Star happened a year ago, and you're like, no, in my background, the Red Star happened 10 years ago, we got a problem. So pulling in these important events from massive amounts of information and trying to make a viable timeline that everyone could sort of agree on, I was really proud of that, because I had so many other authors work to treat respectfully, so many different players and player types who love every single clan out there, every single bloodline out there, that I wanted them to see themselves and love themselves in this timeline. And I still wanted there to be points of argument. Is one of the important things about a political social game like Vampires. You have to have argument. I have to be able to say the Red Star was bad. No, the Red Star was good. And there has to be something on both sides to base that argument on, or we don't have anything to talk about.
Right.
So I loved being able to do that, and I was very happy with the outcome.
So I have a follow-up, but this is for additional parades. You mentioned that you played the game.
Oh yeah.
And you went to tournaments. So
Oh, yeah.
There is something that I found amazing and beautiful about the tournaments of this game, that you could influence the story.
Oh yeah. I loved that.
Did you have the chance to do it?
Oh yeah. I would.
And
I was lead storyteller on that for I think 5 years, something like that. And I would go to all the major tournaments, or we would do a tournament event on a certain weekend and then get everybody's stuff in. And it would be my job to go through and go, all right, 80% of the victories are Crane, so it looks like Crane won this. Or to sit at Gen Con and watch the final battles and make the story up from there. And I would always try to put into whatever the final story was, if I'd seen a card being used, or if I'd seen the two people had a joke. Sometimes I would put in other things that I had seen at the tournament. Like somebody won, I think it was a semi-round with a Monk 5 Rings deck, got all 5 rings out. And it like in an 8-man or a 4-man, and I was like, and so I had to mention that even if he didn't win the tournament, because it was so cool and so important. And I wanted the players to see themselves. I wanted the players to see the cool thing. And there were times when we all cried. One of my favorite stories is we ran an L5R LARP, and I was playing Shizue, white wig and everything. And a dragon samurai came up to me out of character and was like, "See that unicorn over there? That's my girlfriend, and I want to ask her to marry me tonight." And I said, "Okay, let me help you." And he was like, "Yeah, I want you to help me." So I got out in the middle of the people as Shizue, and I called them all together in game, and I said, "I need to tell a story. In this story, there's a dragon samurai, and he comes to the emperor. He's summoned by the emperor. He's summoned with a unicorn samurai, and the emperor's like, I need this message to get across Rokugan, or the crab will not know an attack's happening. And the unicorn's like, I don't need him. I'm going to go fast on my horse. And the dragon's like, I don't need her. I know the back paths. I'll make it fine. And the emperor's like, you're going together. Just go. And so they go off, and they're cranky at each other. And then I grabbed a guy out of the crowd who was dressed like a Nezumi. He had a rat on. And I was like, well, I need an ogre, and only you could play the dishonorable ogre because you're a rat. So I pull him out in there, and I had him, like, he attacked them. And it was like the ogre attacked the dragon and the unicorn, and the dragon like managed to the unicorn managed to get the ogre in a small area, but then she couldn't get to him because it was between rocks, and the dragon had to finish it up. But the dragon couldn't have killed the ogre without the unicorn couldn't have killed without the dragon, and that is why the clans worked together. And then at the end of it, he got down on his knees and asked her to marry him, and it was so cool. It was an amazing, they wrote me like years later, and they still remembered it. I've had players write me and ask for, like, this is my 15th anniversary with my wife, and we met over this. Will you write me a short story? And I'm like, yeah, sure. You know, if I've got the time, I'll help you out. Yeah, because they love it, and I love it, and I'm not. I always said I'm not just a writer and a designer. I'm playing the game. I wanna see stories and things that are amazing. I want people to come up to me and say they've done these things, or they've built these characters I never thought of, and I want to be wowed by them too.
That's amazing.
I've been very lucky.
See, so many stories that those are great. So many myths. So you have an extensive career. What advice would you give to someone who wants to get into game writing or fantasy fiction today?
Right. Don't just think about writing. Right. Don't just think about publishing. Publish. Even if you just make your own hack website and start hucking fan fiction on there, you know, go to the fan fiction websites, put it out there, get people to comment on it. Find your favorite TV show and write some fan fiction for the characters. Put it out there, because the more you do that, the better you'll get, and the more you'll get used to criticism and be able to say, this is good criticism, this is just your opinion, because that's important too. You have to be able to say, this will make it better, and that's just your way. You know, I don't want it to be that way specifically. But if you're sitting around wondering why you're not writing, it's because you're not actually writing. Go write.
Great advice.
That's good advice.
Well, one of the questions that we always try to ask people from the game industry, in this case, the editorial or writing background, is there something in TTRPGs or fantasy writing that you think people should be paying attention to, something that is flying under the radar, something happening that perhaps we are not aware of?
Yeah. All the stories that we tell each other from our role-playing games and LARP games and even into television and other industries are us normalizing the world around us. Us saying, this guy can be a hero too. That girl can be a hero too. And the more stories we have out there that show us positive role models that are every color, every creed, every type of person, queer, trans, anything, the more we will see each other as human, and the more we will see each other as part of a society of all. And that is something that people don't think about when they write stories. And the most popular stories really should bear that in mind. I mean, we have examples of authors who've written books, and you read it, and when you're done, you're like, it was a good book, but oh, that one character was such a stereotype, or such a, you know, that's not the way I've known people. We are telling the world who we are. Tell them who everybody is.
Right, that's beautiful.
So
I put you out of silence.
No, it's a good silence.
We're processing this. This is amazing. Thank you.
So, can we know what are you working on now?
Right now, I happen to be doing some ghostwriting for business leaders, because they do that too. It's all just statistics, and I love rules. I have a gentleman I'm writing a series of articles for who does a lot of retirement and accounting stuff, and he writes these like this thick articles, and it's one of my jobs to make sure that people want to read that it makes sense. Like, and one of the things that I really brought into a lot of my career from L5R, from having that route there, was the ability to tell a story in 5 words. You know, you have this much text at the bottom of a card, and you got to make this guy awesome because he's going to be in everybody's decks. But because he's going to be in everybody's decks, he's got all this text to clarify. You got 5 words. You know, being able to make people read just a few words and see who that is and get who that is, and not always by saying, you know, Federico had brown hair, but by saying, you know, a man stood on a cliff, smiled at me, and jumped off. now you have a story in your head. Why? Who is he? What's he doing? But you only had that much room to give it to them. And being able to write that concisely and invoke someone's imagination, that's something that I learned early on, and I think it's a good lesson.
Sorry, I always wanted to know. You are talking about the flavor text of the cards, right?
Yeah. The flavor text. I wrote all of it. How did I write all that?
Some of those are really insightful, and some are really funny, and some others are really weird.
Yes, that is also me.
This is a question that we all have in my playroom. How do you do this? Because we see that we read the books and they are fine, but the flavor text, as you say, 5
And you want to know the secret?
Yes.
You're writing the story. All I said was there was a man on a cliff. He jumped off. You had the story after that. I gave you enough to tell your own story, and therefore invest in the game, invest in the card, invest in the character, because it's my work to make you dream. It's your work to dream it.
That's also beautiful. Ree, you're shooting some phrases.
I'm a writer.
It shows.
And we can see that you love it.
I do. I really do. I'm a tremendous geek, and I have been super fortunate in my career, not just in having the opportunities to write, but the opportunities to meet and speak with other amazing authors, people who design games, people who teach me about mechanics so that my writing can be more depth and have more meaning with the mechanics, make the whole game work together. I've been very lucky.
Amazing. Where can anyone find you on your work?
Learsfool.com, which is from the fact that my early work was Shakespearean. That was my undergraduate work, was Shakespearean, and my favorite character was the Fool. And I wrote an early draft of a paper where Cordelia and the Fool might have been played by the same person, because when one's off stage, the other's on stage, and they're both the most loyal. And so I just kept the moniker Lear's Fool, and now I have learsfool.com, and you're welcome to pop by there and send me a note and see my list of random things and the very sporadic blog entries that I put up.
We will do that. So, Ree, thank you so much for your time.
Absolutely.
For sharing all of those insights and those insights that left us speechless too. That's a really good sign.
Storytellers should.
They should indeed.
Thank you all for improving role play everywhere that people see your videos, and thank you for being just as passionate. It means a lot, and the more voices we have, the better we'll be.
Thank you. It's been such a treat talking to you. I'm so bragging with my friends on Sunday.
Feel free to write me emails, guys. I don't mind.
It's amazing. Thanks a lot. You're an amazing person to chat with, and you have so much to share. And well, I hope someone finds this interview as exciting as I did, at least.